Well, welcome to this special edition of Andrew and Jerry Save the World. Sometimes we're guestless. In this case, we are Jerryless today, but I wanted to do this special edition anyway. We are joined by two gentlemen. Very excited to have them on. In fact, I took my glasses off for the video because I'm so vain, but I need to be able to read their bios. Their names are Jeff Abraham and Burt Kearns. They do many things, but one of the things that caught my eye was the book that they wrote together. The Show Won't Go On, the most shocking, bizarre, and historic deaths of performers on stage. In fact, I will show you all a picture of the cover of the book from Amazon. Here it is. It is a fantastic book. I've enjoyed reading it. But they, in their own right, I mean, they both have storied careers. They're writing other books as well. Jeff is an American publicist, comedy historian, and author. He is represented some fantastic comedians, well-known comedians like George Carlin and David Brenner. He's been a research consultant, conducted interviews for the Archive of American Television. He's on the board of the National Comedy Center, and we're going to talk to him about this. He is completing the first authorized biography of the Ritz brothers. Meanwhile, Burt Kearns is an American author, television, and film producer, well known for his work, his 1999 tabloid television memoir, Tabloid Baby. Also, someone who was involved in some of the early true crime. I would say this, am I right, Burt? True crime television series?
Most definitely, yeah.
Yeah,
everything from mugshots to current affair.
Yeah, well, the current affair, that's what I was going for.
Yeah.
And then, not that was all about crime, but we'll talk about that. He's also a Jerry Lewis fanatic. And I would say Jeff has one of the largest, if not the largest, comedy record collections around the world. We're going to talk about that as well. Bert's got his collection of Jerry Lewis tattoos. He is writing a biography of Lawrence Tierney, and I got to get into those stories. Absolutely 100% have to get into those stories. But gentlemen, so glad you could join me today. And let's, it's funny because normally I don't get into the bios that extended wise, and I normally just jump right into questions. So why people dying on stage? Obviously I can get the public fascination. What drew you to the subject?
I have to give credit to Donald Trump. So, well, maybe I should say Elvis. It's a little bit of both. About 19 years ago, I went to see an Elvis tribute performer at Trump 29 Casino out in Coachella, out near Palm Springs.
Wow.
I had a client who was also on the bill. And part of the show was a gentleman. You probably don't know his name, but you know his voice. Ladies and gentlemen, Elvis has left the building.
Sure.
Thank you and good night. Named Al Dvorin. At the end of the show, Al's in the lobby mulling around talking to fans and said, Al, you've done it all. I mean, he goes back to 1955 with the Colonel. He said, when are you going to write a book? He said, yeah, I know. I will get to it. That was 10 o'clock Saturday night. Monday morning, I'm eating breakfast, watching the local news, and I hear Al Dvorin was killed in a car accident.
Wow.
Sunday morning.
Wow.
And I was just with him. He literally, less than 12 hours after I said goodnight to him, he was killed in a car accident.
Yeah. And
you think about the fleeting moments that we've all had, that I should have attended that show. Or I saw someone's last show. And it really made me thinking.
Sure.
We all knew that Jim Croce, died in a plane crash on our way to a show, and Hank Williams died, and we all knew one or two performers who died on stage. So I said, that could be an interesting book. And I came up with a great title, The Show Won't Go On.
Sure.
And unfortunately, that's all I did.
Yeah.
And I would say to everybody, I'm going to do this book. And everyone said, yeah, whatever. And Burt is the only Michigana, if I can use an Italian expression, who said,
of course,
that's a great idea. We should do it. Burt?
This was actually about 12 years after Jeff saw that infamous, notorious concert. And he was over once. They've known Jeff for about 20 years. We've worked together. We've socialized together. Jeff's just been a good friend. He came over to the house and he said, I've got this idea for a book. It's called The Show Won't Go On. I want to do a book about performers who died on the way to a show, on the way home from a show, maybe even died on stage. I said, you know what? Let's do it. Let's start researching it. We both love to do research. So we started digging in. We got to about 1,000 performers, literally. People who had died on in a plane crash after a show or in a car crash on the way to a show. I said, Jeff, I think we have enough to just do people who died during a performance on stage. And so that's what we did. We wound up with, again, over 400. We go back pretty far. I think the earliest we went back was 1597.
Wow.
That was the magician Carlin, who caught bullets. One of his assistants got angry with him and bashed in his brains with a pistol on stage, and he was really the first person to die on stage. And we just kept looking, and they kept going.
It is amazing, and the book is full of these. I mean, and folks, it's fantastic stories, both of very famous people. I mean, you guess, but a lot of time, I know you've talked about this ad nauseum, both Dick Shawn and Parkyakarkus. But then also the more obscure ones. And my favorite story is the one about, now I can't remember the magician's name, but the fake Chinese magician who was from Yonkers, I guess. And which hits close to home for me. And I'm sorry, I don't want to take it away, but he dies on stage, and that's not the shocking part, is it?
Well, there was a very famous Asian performer named Chingling's Fu. And so this performer, American performer, decided to adopt a Asian performer and do his act, basically. And, Europe was, the world was so big, someone could be doing the act in England and somebody can do Australia, and you could get away with it. There was no internet and things of that nature. So he was a very successful performer, and one part of his show was doing a bullet catch. And he had been doing it for more than a decade. And it got to the point where it was not the closer of the show. It was something he did every now and then. And on this one night, it was not a success. He drops to the stage, and for the first time, English is uttered. He goes, "I think I've been shot."
Oh my God.
And we learned the mystery.
And the audience is
he was actually named William Robinson.
Wow. I mean, let's hold on for a second, because I think, when people think of catching bullets, they think that there's something fake that's involved. But I'm reminded of the Saturday Night Live sketch from the mid '80s in which Christopher Reeve was the guest host. I don't know if you guys remember this. And it's Jim Belushi as Richard Donner, and they're trying to get him to get Christopher Reeve to learn how to catch bullets. And they're like shooting the gun at him, and he can't do it. But Gary Kroeger is able to catch the bullets, and for a brief moment, it looks like Gary Kroeger is going to be Superman, the Richard Donner Superman. I mean, literally, a bullet catching act is literally someone firing a gun at the bullet catcher, and they catch the bullets, right? I mean, I'm not missing something here.
Burt, you want to tell them the secret?
Secret to successful bullet catching is, as Penn Jillette let us in on it. They're probably the foremost practitioners of it today, Penn and Teller. He let us know that it's a trick. There is trickery involved, whether it's the bullet itself or the velocity of the bullet or what's actually being fired. It is a trick. Not everybody gets the fact that it's a trick, and it often goes wrong for that reason.
I was always under the impression, right, and I'm sure this is the way many of them do it, where you have someone fires the pistol and it's a blank, and the magician has the bullet in his mouth, and he is able to pass it to the front of his mouth, right? It's like people who pre-tie cherry stems in their mouths and sort of pretend to do it that way. I mean, that's what I was. That's some of them, isn't it?
That's one of them. Our favorite is a guy named Ralph Biala. He was from Germany, and he actually had a set of steel dentures that he would wear, and he would perform the bullet catch. He did this 3,000 times. It would be fired through 3 panes of glass. He would have metal mesh gloves. It would go through the gloves into his steel dentures, and he would catch the bullet. The problem with Ralph is that it led to headaches.
Yes, I can't imagine why.
And poor Ralph, one day he was walking through the mountains of Germany and fainted and fell off a mountain and died, so they attributed that to the bullet catch.
But of course he didn't die on stage, so that wasn't in the book.
On stage, no. That was another thing that happened with us, is that so many people died on stage in our research that we had to come up with the rules. I mean, you had to either be stricken on stage, be carried off the stage, and then die within an hour or so, or you had to die on stage. We had people like the great jazz trumpeter Lee Morgan. He was in a jazz club on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. His band was on stage waiting for him to play the 2 a.m. set. His common law wife came in, and as he was walking to the stage, she shot him in the back.
Wow.
And he dropped dead like inches from the stage. And Jeff and I said, well, no, he didn't make it to the stage. He doesn't make the book.
And we had a couple of performers who died backstage or in rehearsal. I said, nah, didn't quite. But to go back to the bullet catch,
please.
Yes, it is a trick. But, just like stuntmen who we did not include, the people that we included were people who was an accidental death. We did not do athletes and stuntmen who literally walk into death. But, magic should be safe. But when you are dealing with tricks that deal with gunpowder or, Houdini, jumping into a river while chained into there are elements of danger. But Penn said, we try not to do anything more dangerous than sitting in a chair. Yeah. But that doesn't mean someone did not prepare properly, and that's what happened.
Yeah, we just watched a trick from the 80s, Penn and Teller, where Penn's doing a card trick while Teller's in a tank of water, and then of course, eventually the card comes up and Teller's supposed to be holding his breath for 4.5 minutes, and then the cards are. I mean, I having seen them a couple of times. It's always fascinating. I mean, I want to get to some of the other stuff too, but talking about I guess the two most famous are probably Parkyakarkus and Dick Shawn. And Dick Shawn's death is so fascinating because he was and tragic because he was so offbeat and nobody really knew, right? It's talk a little bit about that and about his son's reaction.
I'll let Burt answer that because he did a wonderful interview with Adam Shawn, his son.
Yeah.
But if the one takeaway I can say from the book is if you're going to die on stage, try not to be a comedian. We don't recommend it. Burt?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, Dick Shawn died on April 17th, 1987, performing at the college in San Diego. The thing with Dick Shawn was that he was an avant-garde performer. He had a show called The Second Greatest Entertainer in the Whole Wide World. And the show would open, the audience would walk in, and they would see garbage on the stage, refuse, newspapers, bricks, things like that. And they would file in, and then the lights would go down, and Dick Shawn would rise from this mess. He'd been lying there on the stage for like maybe a half hour without moving before the show started. He would go into the intermission by either falling down onto the stage and taking a nap and just lying there throughout an intermission. So one of the words they gave the stagehands was, if I should fall down in the middle of the set, don't run out. It's part of the act. It's part of the shtick. So here we are in San Diego. His son is working as his stage manager and running the lights from the back of the theater. Dick Shawn is there, and he looks out at the audience and he says, okay, how about this bit? Let's pretend there's a nuclear war outside. And a nuclear bomb goes off, and everyone in the world is killed except the people in this auditorium, and I will be your leader. And with that, he did a face plant on the stage. Wow. Dead silence, some nervous giggles, nothing.
Yeah.
Everybody's waiting. People say, hey, take his wallet. Their laughter, this and that. And his son's in the back and says, wait a minute, Dad, I haven't seen him do that one before. And he seemed to hit hard there. So he gets on the cans to one of the stage assistants says, can you go out there and check on him? Went out and checked on him and then walked off stage. Everybody's still laughing, etc. And he said, what'd he say? He goes, we didn't say anything. He wasn't like moving. That's when the son realized that something happened. He ran down to the front of the stage. As it happened, the college was a teaching college, and there was a hospital right next door, and the place was full of cardiac surgeons. So they went right to work on Dick Shawn on the stage while people were walking up to the stage asking for their money back.
That is the thing that gets me. I mean, that's tough to swallow, but that's crazy.
It happens. Yeah, it happens. Yeah. Dick Shawn did, and as we know, Dick Shawn, didn't survive that.
Yeah.
And what a way to go, right?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I don't know if you guys saw, there was an HBO, I think it was an HBO Max, maybe it was even a Cinemax show last year called Station 11, and it opens with a production of King Lear, and the one of the characters, the gentleman playing King Lear, dies on stage, and you know, people are very confused by this, and they don't know if it's part of the show, and they call for a doctor, and people don't know if it's part of the show. But tragic there. It's interesting that you raise the issue of comedians not dying on stage, because, right, I mean, I'm sure both of you can speak to this. When it became known that Andy Kaufman had cancer, nobody believed him, did they?
Right.
Absolutely.
Today, people still think he's alive.
And, and Bob Zamuda has done a very good job of keeping that legacy alive by doing all these Tony Clifton tribute shows and things of that nature.
Yeah, Bob, and I can see Bob Zamuda making Tony Clifton die on stage as part of that. Let's shift gears a little bit. And I do want to hear about this. And we were talking about this before the show a little bit. Jeff, want to hear about actually, you know something, let's put it even further back. I want both of you to talk a little bit about how you got into this. Jeff, how did you get into the publicity side of comedy? Burt, how did you get into TV production? Talk a little bit about that.
Well, Burt got into, I guess I should talk about myself then.
Sure, yeah.
I just turned 60. I grew up at a wonderful time in the mid 70s when there was a Marx Brothers revival. I remember when You Bet Your Life came, in syndication. It was for the first time in the mid 70s, and Animal Crackers was seen for the first time in like 1974, and Groucho did An Evening with Carnegie Hall. So I remember that. And I grew up in New York with WPIX, Officer Joe Bolton. So I grew up with Laurel and Hardy, with Chuck McCann and the Three Stooges. So I was always intrigued by all that. At some point, I found my true love was Jerry Lewis. Burt and I will agree on this, and I think that's what we bond more than anything. I don't think there's anyone who makes us laugh longer, louder, or harder than Jerry Lewis.
Interesting. Wow.
And then I was also an amateur magician, but I had, with these fingers, no talent, and I said, let me try to go behind the scenes in management or agent. And I took my love of advertising and shook it up with showbiz and became a entertainment publicist. And very lucky, I got to represent all my idols, as you mentioned, David Brenner, George Carlin, Andrew Dice Clay, the Smothers Brothers, and I worked with everybody. So to have this love, and the book, as Burt said earlier, we both love pop culture.
Yes,
we're both amateur historians. Sherlock Holmes. We would, if anyone ever found our emails while doing the research for the book, I think we'd be in a lot of trouble. When Meatloaf collapsed on stage, I would send Burt, hey, do you think we make chapter 6? But more excitingly, when Burt would find a tidbit, I would try to outdo him. I go, wait a minute, I found this though, Burt. And he goes, but did you find this article from a year before? Wow. So it was a very great yin and yang.
Sure.
So I think and we both brought different interests. I may have not been an expert on opera, and Burt was able to, teach that. And I loved the comedian, so I could do that. And so it was a great yin and yang. And Burt, being an investigative journalism, took it to, we weren't going to take, wasn't like what John Ford said, when in doubt, print the myth, Burt, I think that's my story, Burt.
Yeah. And we did. We went out of our way to cut through a lot of the conventional wisdom, the stories that are out there that aren't true. Because there's a lot of misinformation. You'll find out, believe it or not, that there's a lot of misinformation on Wikipedia out there.
Yeah, shocker.
Believe it or not.
Shocker.
So we found that out. Yeah.
But it's so funny you say that, talking about misinformation, because I used to listen to a couple of radio hosts who were obsessed with Elvis and obsessed with Elvis's death and the size of his colon and what they had to do. And actually, I got to ask you both this. I mean, you both are probably very interested in this Elvis documentary that's coming out. Not documentary, the Elvis biopic that's coming out. I mean, have you seen this with Baz Luhrmann Elvis?
Oh yeah, with Tom Hanks as Colonel Tom.
Colonel Tom Parker. Yes. So Excited about this. Burt, where did you grow up?
So I grew up in the suburbs of New York City in Connecticut.
Okay.
And in Norwalk, Connecticut originally, and in Trumbull, Connecticut. And getting back to Jerry Lewis, I grew up with my childhood being in that sweet spot of Jerry Lewis's career.
Yeah.
Around the time of The Bellboy, around the time of Cinderfella and The Errand Boy. And I would go on Saturday afternoons to Jerry Lewis double features as a kid. Wow. And then in the summers, we'd write into MDA and they would send you packets and kits on how to have your own carnival in your driveway. And I would have Muscle District carnivals in my driveway. And as I grew up and got a bit older and a little bit more cynical, I was in love with the telethon. And when VHS started coming out, I would be the person I'd have friends all over town who were given certain hours they had to record for me. So I would wind up having, the entire telethons recorded on VHS and keep them.
See, it's funny. I didn't start appreciating Jerry Lewis until much, much later. And so I'm a little bit younger, slightly younger than you guys. Grew up in Westchester. So we all grew up watching the same TV. And so when Channel 5 would show the telethon, I was, I'd just get really frustrated because whatever I was watching, the cartoons or what have you, I couldn't watch. It was only years later that I began to really appreciate the genius, but also fascinated by the persona of Jerry. I mean, the ego is probably an unfair word in all of this, but because he is a recognized genius. He invented whole technologies or whole techniques for making movies. And I would say The King of Comedy is one of my favorite films of all time. But yeah, so I get where you guys are coming from. My New York City TV, PIX, WOR, Little Rascals in the afternoon, Bugs Bunny on Channel 5, Courageous Cat and Minute Mouse on Channel 9, all of those things. I don't know about you guys, but and my younger brothers make incredible amounts of fun of me for this, because I will go on YouTube and pull up old videos of WPIX, and we're talking commercial breaks, we're talking the intros to the movies on PIX or Channel 9, and I will watch those videos incessantly because they remind me of my child. I mean, am I alone here? Do you guys do any of that?
Oh, always.
I think you're alone.
Yeah. Okay. What was that, Burt? Go ahead.
No, always looking at that. I was lucky enough, again, I started out in journalism, in print journalism. I was a newspaper reporter, and I was an editor of suburban weeklies in Connecticut. And then I moved to New York in 1981, and I was lucky enough to get a job on Channel 5 News at WNEW. Wow. And I worked on the 10 o'clock news. And that's how I really got my start in journalism. I started out working on the assignment desk and listening to police scanners and leading crews around the town. Became a writer and a producer. Then I worked for about 5 years at News 4 New York, WNBC, TV News in Rockefeller Center. I worked for CBS Network News. And then in 1989, I was kidnapped by a group of Australians. These were the people that Rupert Murdoch had hired to take over Channel 5 News. I became WNYW, it was Fox. I went over and worked with them, and then wound up breaking all sorts of laws with these tabloid people, and wound up in Hollywood on the Paramount lot, running the show Hard Copy, which we did for 3 years. But the highlight of working at A Current Affair in New York was that you could basically cover any story you wanted. The whole idea was we wanted to set the agenda and cover stories that other people weren't covering. And if you want to do a feature thing, people would say they want to go golfing in North Carolina at some golf course. So they would find a murder that took place nearby. Of course. Cover the murder and they go golfing. Well, my thing, of course, was I wrote a letter to Jerry Lewis.
Wow.
And I said, Jerry, my name is Burt Kearns, the managing editor of the show A Current Affair. Would really like the honor of following you around, as you prepare for the telethon. And the reason that I got it were two things. One was that back in the 80s, I used to spend my weekends going to record stores in New York, in Greenwich Village, and finding old copies of the album Jerry Lewis Just Sings. It was a standards album he recorded back in the 50s. And I had about 20 copies that I collected.
So time out for a second. Hold on, because I heard you say this in another interview. And explain this to me, because I understand maybe buying one, maybe buying two. I mean, this is like assassin levels of buying multiple copies of The Catcher in the Rye. Why so many copies? Why were you constantly buying this one album?
You just want more copies of it.
Okay.
I mean, I would even do this today. I would get copies of the book Last Exit to Brooklyn, which was Andy Kaufman's favorite book. And I remember I saw Andy Kaufman at Carnegie Hall, that Carnegie Hall concert. And after the show, he stood on the steps in a bathrobe, and people were giving him copies of the book Last Exit to Brooklyn, because that was his favorite book.
Wow.
But anyway, I didn't mean to backtrack. But
no, it's fine. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just thought
while I was at NBC,
yeah,
a good friend of mine was the assistant director at Saturday Night Live, so we'd always get to go and sit in and see Saturday Night Live if we wanted to. She told me, she said, "I've got this brief gig I'm doing. I'm going to be the assistant director for the Jerry Lewis Telethon at Caesar's Palace." This was 1987.
Okay.
I said, please get me a job, and I'll do anything. Production assistant. I'll be a runner. I'll get coffee. Please get me a job there. She goes, great. So I got a job working for the Jerry Lewis Telethon in Vegas in 1987. They brought me into the trailer. Everybody's working. This is in the days like before the internet and computers or typewriters.
Sure.
Said, okay, here's the new guy. He's a production assistant. Okay, here's your job. They hand me a stack of papers. It was the script for the show. It was huge. He said, this job comes directly from Jerry. Oh, this is unbelievable. This is great. Okay, what I had to do was, at the top of each script page, it said 1987 muscular dystrophy telethon. I had to take white out and white out muscular dystrophy and type in Jerry Lewis.
Wow.
And I was almost crying. I'm like, oh, this is so wonderful. This is so great. So I used it, and I told Jerry, I said, I've been here in 87 and I collect copies of Jerry Lewis Just Sings. I want to give you a copy. I get a call at my desk at a current affair. Burt, this is Jerry Lewis. Even I don't have a copy of Jerry Lewis Just Sings.
Wow.
Yes, please come. You can have complete access. You can do whatever you want. And the only thing is, I don't want just a 5-minute segment. I want a bigger, Jerry, you get the whole show. We'll do it. So I wound up spending a week with Jerry Lewis, preparing for the telethon, and stayed up with Jerry for the whole telethon in '89.
So there's always this phrase, and I want to ask both of you this. Be careful meeting your idols, right? Because you never know when they're going to disappoint. They'll say something. I mean, it sounds like this was a total 100% well worth it both times. Sitting down with Jerry. I mean, obviously you have festooned your body with tattoos of Jerry Lewis. And then Jeff, I want to ask you this, but Burt, so any moment of disappointment?
No, he was, first of all, we had a camera crew following him
that's
around,
a good point.
which was unbelievable. And I would just walk with them, and he gave us Jerry. He would make jokes at every moment. He'd have a tantrum because he didn't have his Eskimo pies and his fudgesicles in his thing. He would scream at his kid, but he would do shtick, and he was rude. He cursed. He did everything. He was Jerry 100%. So there was awesome. No way he could let me down. And then finally, I got to sit and do an interview with him, and it was and he sat, and it was supposed to be like a 10-minute interview. Went on for about 40 minutes, and he was great. He was Jerry Lewis.
After Jerry died, I made a list about the number of times I either met him or saw him in person. It was about 25 times. I mean, I even, was in Jerry's home, and I interviewed him in the same room where Seinfeld did Comedians in Cars.
Oh, yeah.
And I interviewed him for my Rich Brothers book, because Jerry's idol was the great Harry Ritz, and he could have not been nicer. And I was backstage with him when they were introducing the documentary, The Method to the Madness, which I did the PR for. And I saw the ornery side. So I've seen most, but I'm not going to be one of those people. At least he was nice to me.
Sure.
He was wonderful to me.
Oh, that's good.
And you can separate the man from the artist, and that could be a whole other show. The year after George Carlin got the Mark Twain, I got to work on the Bill Cosby Mark Twain. Wow. And I spent a day with him, and he couldn't have been any nicer. And also, I will say, with somebody who has one of the largest comedy record collections, his albums are essential. They're
Sure.
still the greatest comedy. Noah and Buck and Junior Barnes, You Gunky, and all are classics, and we should not take that away.
Sure. I don't know if
Jerry to me was a pussycat, as he would say.
I don't know if either of you have ever been. I don't know if you've ever been to DC, and if you've been to DC, if you've ever been in Ben's Chili Bowl, then
They took his photo off the wall.
Well, yeah, they did. So I'm very close to the Ben's Chili Bowl family. We're all many years. In fact, I one of my proudest moments was during the Obama inauguration in 2009. I was working. They asked me to come in. They said it's an all hands thing. Everybody in the family's coming in. I worked as a bouncer at Ben's next door. But I know it was very hard for that family, when they had to sort of go down that road, because the two had been linked for so long. Cosby used to say that part of among the things that were in his contracts, when he would play in DC, he had to have 2 half smokes from Ben's Chili Bowl delivered to his dressing room wherever he was performing. He showed up at the 50th anniversary, the 60th anniversary of the bowl, or maybe it was Ben Ali's 80th birthday. Doesn't matter. Either way, he shows up and he's on stage, and everybody else is dressed to the nines, and he comes out in a tracksuit, which I thought was rather fitting. Gotta ask this, Jeff. The story, and then Burt, I want to talk to you about Buddy Hackett. I want to ask you about Wayne Newton and Perry Como.
No,
Paul Anka. Paul Anka. Yes, sorry, of course. Paul Anka.
I just saw on PBS. It's probably airing around the country on your local PBS station. Paul did a concert, I believe, in the Smith Center in Las Vegas, and he still has it. I mean, I guess he's different. 78, 80. I apologize. But he's give or take that age, more or less. He has it. He's brilliant. A friend of mine saw him in Chicago a number of years ago, said, "Oh my God, one of the best performers." So, hands down. So, Paul had an album called Rock Swings, where he took rock songs and gave it a big band arrangement. Wow. And he got great critical acclaim. He did Letterman. He got the New York Times, NPR. Unfortunately, we wound up doing the sequel, the follow-up, which you're not going to get the New York Times again. You're not going to get, Letterman goes, if he wants to sit in with the band, when we cut to commercial. So he's not happy. Yeah. I don't want to say a guy 5'3" has a Napoleonic complex, but I wouldn't be surprised. Also, I think every singer has a Tom Jones voodoo doll. They go, God, wait a minute, why is he on every show? You know what I mean? Why is Tony Bennett hosting, on the MTV Awards? I'm just as good. So hold on, Jeff, time out for a second, because I had this conversation with somebody fairly recently. It's the same thing. Listen, it's certainly the same thing with radio hosts, but most importantly, it's the same thing with comedians. Every comedian is sitting there, right, at the comedian's table, looking up on stage and saying, I could do that joke better. I could do this better. I mean, that's all the comedians had that with all the older guard. Yeah. Had that with Don Rickles. Don Rickles, his publicist, is a dear friend of mine, and Rickles was on every talk show. Yeah. And they would say, well, Johnny, stop having people on because of age. He goes, they're still booking Rickles. So they all had that same voodoo doll of Don Rickles. Yeah. So anyway, sorry. We're representing Wayne Newton, and Wayne Newton was so nice. Couldn't have been any nicer. He was on Dancing with the Stars. Yeah. So we're promoting that. So somehow my boss is on the airplane with Anka's, I think it was girlfriend or soon-to-be wife, and she lets it slip. We're representing Wayne Newton, and Wayne Newton calls her office, goes, "What's this I hear? You represent Wayne Newton?" And I'm like, Jackie Gleason, humna. How do I answer that? And it's the longest pause. It must be sure. And he says, "I'll take that as a yes." And he goes, and I'm going to have to bleep myself. He goes, No, go ahead and say it. Okay. He goes, America is going to see, America's going to see that America knows that the fucker can't sing. Now we'll all see that he can't. No, America will know that the fucker can't sing and dance, something to that effect.
That's so funny.
Oh, and I was like, oh my God. There's that famous bootleg cassette going around, a tape of Paul yelling at his band for not having, clean shirts and, playing missing notes. And Paul was asked about that on Terry Gross at the end of the interview. And he's very proud of the fact. He goes, look, I'm on stage. It's my name. And when they did the last Oceans movie with Andy Garcia, it might've been the girls movie. Anyway, they took his script from that tape. God. And Paul was very proud of it. And Andy Garcia is talking to all his minions the way Paul Anka talked to his band.
That's astounding. Wow.
But I ran into Paul years later at a book signing, and he was nice. So it depends on the day, but so sometimes you're right. Maybe it's not best to work with your idols. Let's put it that way.
I'm trying to think. It's so funny. I had when I was still doing policy work, I had a friend of mine who got dressed down by a cabinet secretary. Like literally, he'd said something. He was working outside. He got called into the cabinet secretary's office for a meeting, and the cabinet secretary dressed him down. And he came out and he called me. He says, "Andrew, I don't know how I'm going to be able to work in this town." I said, "Mike, you had a cabinet secretary just take 45 minutes out of her schedule to yell at you. I mean, that's the best story ever." And he actually did wind up leaving the political and policy world, which is too bad. But it's those little instances. And Burt, I got to ask. So now I got to ask you about Buddy Hackett and what was it? Comedy Court.
This was had to be about 15 years ago.
Yeah.
We had the idea to do a comedy version of like Judge Judy.
Explain this concept to me, because I find this fascinating.
Well, you have Judge Judy.
Yes.
Who they bring people in, and they bring up small claims cases, and she decides.
Yes.
In this case, we would have the wisdom of Buddy Hackett as the judge. And
I love this.
And we talked to Buddy about it. He would say things like, well, yes, let's say someone is they have a lemon tree, and some of the lemons are in your yard, and you take the lemons and they want you to pay for them. Well, I'll decide, maybe you get anyway. Buddy took it very seriously. What happened was Peter Brennan, who was my mentor and my boss in the tabloid TV days, became the executive producer of Judge Judy. So he ran the Judge Judy show. I came up with the idea of doing a comedy version of it. He said, "Well, that's great. Let's try it." And we wound up. We started, I believe, with Joan Rivers. We were going to do something with Joan Rivers. That didn't work out. And then here comes Buddy Hackett. So my agent at the time arranged us to have a meeting with Buddy Hackett at his house in Beverly Hills. So we arrived there at probably around noon, and the place it's in the flats of Beverly Hills, and every window was totally shuttered. It was like,
yes.
He lets us in, and the place is totally dark, and we're hearing a lot of barking, a lot of noise, etc. His wife had basically turned half of the house into an animal shelter for homeless dogs.
I've got shades of Doris Day going in my head, but go ahead.
The guest rooms, the rooms, etc. But Buddy had one section of the house that was his, a giant family recreation room in which he had a bar, he had a pool table, he had display cases for his golf clubs, display cases for his guns, and of course, everything was shut, so it was permanent midnight in there. And it was noon. We went to Peter and I, and our producer Allison Holloway was with us, and we sat down, and Buddy immediately asked us what we wanted to drink. It was noon, and we said, "Well," he made us vodka, Ricky's, I think that was his big thing. And he sat and he talked, and he began to basically perform for us. He told us jokes. He read from his book of poetry that he had written. He read the letter that he wrote to Bill Cosby when his son Ennis died.
Yes.
And he cried as he read the note. And then he told us some more jokes, and he gave us some more drinks, and then said, "Okay, here's what I want." Out of nowhere, he said, "Here's what I want. I want this amount of money. He had this very busty, tall female that he wanted to be the court bailiff.
Okay.
And he wanted his son Sandy, who I later met as a great guy. He wanted Sandy to be part of it as well.
Sure.
And he said, and I won't work with any assholes, and that's it. And as a matter of fact, why don't we not do the show? Why don't we just meet here once a week and drink?
Yeah.
And we said, great, that's terrific. So he went along with the show. The great thing about Buddy Hackett's life at the time was he would get up every morning at 4:00 in the morning and drive to Palm Springs so he could golf when the sun came up.
Wow.
And then he would drive back to Beverly Hills.
Wow.
And so he had this nightclub life even then.
Sure.
The show went kind of, nothing happened with it for a while. A few months later, something did happen. Somebody was interested in it. And I called Buddy. At this time, he had just signed on to that show that Jay Moore was on Fox.
Oh, the sports show?
It was one where they swore and they bleeped out the curse words.
I think it was called Action, I think.
He played a studio boss, Jay.
That's right.
Well, anyway, Buddy Hackett had just gotten that gig. And I said, Buddy, guess what? They're interested in our show. We're going to have some meetings. And he's like, well, no, I'm not interested. I'm like, no, Buddy, really? Remember, we were at your house. We had this great meeting. You signed the autograph to the book for us. We drank. We wanted to do the show. Go fuck yourself. Excuse me? He's like, go fuck yourself, and hangs up. And I said, a guy named Buddy just told me to go fuck myself. And
that's awesome.
That was the end of my Buddy Hackett dream.
It's funny. I don't know if you guys remember, but there was that a couple of summers ago. There was that summer replacement show. God, Jerry Seinfeld was on one episode, but it was also Tom Papa, and it was like a marriage counseling thing.
Right.
Jerry, right.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds eerily like this.
It.
What was that? What was that, Burt?
I think Seinfeld produced the Tom Papa show, like a marital court thing. Yeah, it would have been a lot of shtick, and Buddy doing a lot of improvising with people.
Hey, I have a question for Burt. Burt, is Buddy Hackett the only comedian who had a gun fascination, or can you think of any others?
Well, Jeff and I were lucky enough to attend the Jerry Lewis estate auction.
Sure.
In Las Vegas. We drove from LA to Vegas to be at this auction. We went over a couple of days, and we had certain things we were really interested in getting.
Yeah.
But we had to wait for the first 75 or 80 lots to be called, which were all of Jerry Lewis's guns.
Wow.
Lot 42, a Luger. Lot 39, a rifle. And we with a gold-plated handle that says Super Jew on it.
Sure, of course, Super Jew. I love it. That's right. I forgot about that moniker.
A lot of guns, Jerry.
Yes. It's not all Charlton Heston, certainly. In the end. Anyway, I've got stories there too, but none that I can tell yet. So, Jeff, let me ask you this. So you got this collection. Do you have a holy grail? Something you're looking for in terms of comedy albums?
I almost, it's funny, you mentioned Buddy Hackett. So someone posts on a Borscht Belt Instagram page, a album, Buddy Hackett tells Yiddish jokes.
Oh my God.
And I'm going, I got to have this. How do I not know about this? And I emailed the person. This is how scary my day is, right? I'm on a Borscht Belt Instagram page.
No. I'm totally tracking with you here.
I emailed the person. I said, "Oh my, I love your page. Da da da. Do you have a copy of this album? How do I get it?" And then I'm thinking, how do I not know this?
Yes.
And I Google it, nothing. And then I realized I was taken. It was this famous person. I'm drawing a blank on his name. He does these famous faux ads.
No. Oh, yes, of course. Yes. The one
yes.
Sorry, yes.
The Mickey Rooney potato
house. Yes.
And because it was so small to blow up, I couldn't read it. But then I finally blow it up and I see it says, and the Hal Gurney Orchestra, the special guest, Harvey Lembeck. And I go, what an idiot. So I email, she says, let me ask the family, let me find out the person sends it to me. And then I said, I think it's fake. Yeah. And I go to the artist. I go, is this yours? He goes, oh my God, I did that years ago. Where did you find it? And then I had to tell her. She goes, are you sure? I said, this is the note. He says, yes, it's mine. So I thought I had a holy grail.
Wow.
So no, the point is, I'm at the point now, I'm finding and looking for regional one-hit wonders. Some guy who was a local guy in Worcester, Mass, that you would only have find the album because you saw him at the Ho Ho House in Worcester, and it was signed. You know, those kind of. So, like a friend of mine says, "Hey, do you have this album by Bob Jones from North Carolina?" I go, I just screwed up the punchline. You have this album by Bob Jones? I go, no. Oh, he's a disc jockey in North Carolina. Well, my friend was calling me from North Carolina, and they had a truckload. So that's what I'm looking. Those are the things that makes the chase funny. Like Lenny Clark, the comedian, when he was a local guy, hand pressed 500 albums, sold them out of the trunk of his car to shows. And someone just said to me, "Hey, do you have this Lenny Clark album?" I said, "No." They said, "If you see it, people ask for ridiculous money, or somebody wants it for $1."
Yeah.
I did find years before I started working for George Carlin, he performed in 1963 at a golf tournament, and they pressed an album for the people who attended the festival. I got it for $5.
Wow.
But the best part, it came with a note from his agent to the Merv Griffin show. "Please book. We'd like you to listen to this album. Consider him for the Merv Griffin show. I know it's only an album, but he makes great funny faces. He'd be great for the show." I showed George the album. He signed it. This is rare, but he said, "This is what got me on the Merv Griffin show."
That's
so
good.
You can't. Those are the moments that you just.
You wonder how much of this stuff was in Joe Franklin's office. I sit here and I wonder about this. It's funny because so my wife and I went to college with Patton Oswalt.
Oh yeah.
And he performed, and it was great. He performed, I want to say spring of 91, at William and Mary. And I wish I had a recording of that because it was just fantastic. So let's turn to the books. Burt, so is Wikipedia right or wrong? Are you working on a book about Lawrence Tierney or no?
I have a book about Lawrence Tierney, Hollywood's real life tough guy.
Yeah.
Which is being released in November. And actually, Patton Oswalt is in the book.
Oh, is he?
He has a terrific Lawrence Tierney story of he was sitting in the, I'll give it away. Patton was sitting near the back row of the New Beverly Cinema. That's the cinema that shows old movies. Actually, Quentin Tarantino just purchased it recently. It's an art house. And he was watching Citizen Kane when suddenly there was some noise behind him and a lot of disturbance, and somebody's grumbling and making noise behind him. And Patton turned around and say, and saw it was Lawrence Tierney, old Lawrence Tierney, all 6 foot, 250 pounds, and sitting there talking to the screen, going, "What the hell is this?" Jeez. And he's yelling at the characters on the screen. They're, "Shut up. No, don't sing. You suck." And he came in the middle of about 15 minutes in, and Lawrence Tierney talked to the screen for 20 minutes while Patton sat there totally afraid to move a muscle.
Sure.
Some kid walked in about 20 minutes later and said, "Larry, you got to get up. We got to go. The car's here." And Larry stood up and said, "I never seen this cocksucker before. It ain't half bad." And walked out of the theater.
That is an amazing story. Holy cow.
And Patton said, he goes, he had a face like an Easter Island statue, but it was like seeing Bigfoot. It was the most wonderful Hollywood experience I've ever had. But anyway.
That is amazing. Oh, now I can't wait. I can't wait to get the book when it comes out in November. I'm sorry, go ahead, Burt.
For folks who don't know, Lawrence Tierney was a tough guy actor back in the 1940s and 50s. He became an overnight star playing John Dillinger in the gangster movie Dillinger in 1945. And then he proceeded over the next 5 or 10 years to drink, brawl, fight his way out of his career, destroyed his career, went to Europe, kept coming back, having little roles here and there. And then about 20 years later, in the late 70s, he made a comeback, looking entirely different. By this time, he was old and bald-headed and put on a lot of weight. He appeared in the movie Arthur, in a famous scene in Arthur where Dudley Moore comes to a diner to propose to Liza Minnelli, who's working the counter, and he's the guy sitting next to Dudley Moore saying, "Where's my role?" And they're going, "Shut up!" And they're yelling at Lawrence Tierney. He then, of course, really hit it big as in Reservoir Dogs.
Yes, of course, it's Joe.
Rediscovered by Tarantino. So it's a great story.
Put in. Where's your tip? Why don't you tip? Sorry.
Right, exactly.
Yes. Oh my God, that is amazing. And Jeff, you've got a book about the Ritz brothers.
Yeah, which Burt and I is I've been working on this project for too many years to mention, and then Burt's going to give it life and breath.
Oh, nice.
Because it's an extension of everybody who's ever loved Jerry Lewis or Danny Kaye and Sid Caesar and Mel Brooks, who all called the Ritz brothers, or especially Harry Ritz, the funniest man.
Yeah.
And it's their life story. They had an amazing career that spanned more than 50 years, from vaudeville to the early days of cable television.
It's and I just remember the scene in Mr. Saturday Night when Buddy Young Jr. is trying to pimp Helen Hunt on the on these famous comedians at the Friars Club, and she had no idea who any of these people were, and he's like, they're everybody. I mean, this is why you don't get me. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jeff.
Right, and it's nice to know that line is now still used in the play Mr. Saturday Night. Billy was of that age where he would have seen them in their movies. But it's really all those guys who were born around 1926 when they were 10-year-old kids who all went to the movies.
Yeah.
Larry Gelbart and people like that, they all said, oh my God, what is going on here? This is different.
Well, and by the same token, right? I mean, the three of us, we all grew up roughly the same area, exposed to roughly the same TV shows. I mean, you guys were also going to the movies and seeing a lot of these things, but you get these kinds of influences out there, and it becomes it's the common thread, right? I'm sorry Jerry's not on with us tonight, because Jerry grew up in the Bronx as well, and so that's one of the areas where he and I sort of bond. Like I would ask you, and we'll ask you guys. So did you have a favorite Wonderama host, right? Were you a Sonny Fox? Yeah, or like for me, it's Bob McAllister. I'm sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, Sonny Fox means nothing to me. In fact, there were always two different Sonny Foxes. When one died, you would go, which one died? But no, Bob McAllister was my guy.
Yes.
And you talk about meeting idols and things of that nature. One of the first celebrities I met when I came to Los Angeles over 40 years ago was Chuck McCann.
Okay.
And I grew up with Chuck McCann.
Yeah,
that was like when my parents saw Cary Grant at a movie premiere. I said, that was my Cary Grant. This is the guy I grew up with, and get to know him and to be on a first name basis with him. So that was my guy.
That's amazing. It's funny. We have part of the family lore. Another cousin of mine who won a prize closet package from Soupy Sales by some she was able to come up with some punny title. Rubber Band plays Snappy Tunes, and that won her a closet full of toys that I think are still in my aunt's closet in the Bronx. So I appreciate that. So gentlemen, the book once again is The Show Won't Go On. It is a fantastic read, to say the least. The authors are Jeff Abraham and Burt Kearns. Gentlemen, thank you so very much for joining me tonight.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Our pleasure. Can I leave you with one?
Please.
Sorry, I want to leave you with one of our favorite stories from the book. As Burt had mentioned, that we really went down every rabbit hole and tried to debunk all the myths. We were one of the few people to ever watch the Dick Cavett show where Rodale died. And the stories in the book, and it's amazing. But there's two quote urban legends that were just so good. We hope they're true. If they're not, they're great reading. So we all remember the great comedian Joe E. Ross, Car 54. Ooh, ooh.
Yes.
Well, he was not doing well, and he was playing third-rate nightclubs. And at this point, that would have been a treat. He was now playing condos. So he's playing the Oakwood Apartments for a gig for $100.
Wow.
Burt, you want to finish our story?
Well, it's actually sort of a short story. He was doing his act in the community room of the Oakwood when he collapsed about halfway through the show and died of a heart attack. And because of that, his latest wife, after they brought the body away, his latest wife went up to the manager to get paid, and the guy only paid her half the money because he only completed half the show.
It's astounding. I mean, again, getting back to the Dick Shawn story, just the chintziness of people. Yeah. I'm reminded in and I know we just said we were going to go, but I'm reminded of with that story of Henny Youngman, getting accosted in an elevator on the way to a gig, and they paid him $200 to go and appear at somebody's party in the hotel. I love that. But before you guys go, I mean, I don't want to get into the whole Parkyakarkus story. But the two different reactions that both Albert Brooks and Super Dave, Bob Einstein, had towards their father's death on stage. Talk a little bit about that before you go. I think that's kind of a fitting way to close this thing out.
I'll give the Albert, and you can give the Super Dave or Bob. Yeah. Albert always said, first of all, Harry Einstein, his real name, was not in the best of health for a long time. But earlier that year or late the year prior, he started to come back and became a favorite at the Friar roasts and functions, and everyone loved him. He literally stole the show, and at this particular show, he killed him, to use a show business expression. And Albert has always said, "Isn't it amazing? My father didn't die on stage. I'm sorry, my father didn't die on the way to the show. My father, he completed his act. He got the last laugh and took a bow. That's what a great way. He went out with laughter in his ear." So that's the way Albert thinks of this. Now, Albert was the youngest of the brothers. Yeah. Where, his brother was older, and it was a very difficult period. Burt?
Yeah. Bob Einstein, Super Dave, was really traumatized by the whole thing. Yeah. And he couldn't say what people, he would tell the story and people would say, "Well, you know what? At least he died doing what he loved." He said, "Really?"
Yeah.
What does your mother do for a living? "Well, she's a housewife." "Oh, well, great. So wouldn't it be nice if she's home and she's in the kitchen and she's cooking or doing the dishes, and I'll come up behind her and shoot her in the back of the fucking head? Then at least you can say that she died doing what she loved." He never bought that. He never.
Oh my God. Yeah, it is
tragic, but you laugh. It's what you do, right?
100%, guys.
And if you go to our website, there's a link to that recording of Parkyakarkus, and it is some of the funniest, 5 or 6 minutes you will hear by a performer. And Art Linkletter, says, "I don't know why this band is not working." I mean, you couldn't ask for a better exit line.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, Jeff. Why don't you guys promote the website?
Well, the show won't go on.com or diedonstage.com, and we'll get you to the same place. We also, sadly, are keeping tabs of performers who die on stage. The performer died on stage just this last week.
Oh no!
In India, but the video has gone viral. The gentleman was playing with an orchestra, completed his song, and then collapsed.
Amazing.
That was actually one of the good things about the pandemic and the lockdown is people stopped dying on stage. When the book came out, one of the issues we had was that people kept dying. We had to keep updating the book. Yeah. And it's dropped off, but now again, we know that we're back because people are beginning to die on stage.
The stories are happening. So the gentlemen, go check that out. The show won't go on.com. Jeff Abraham, Burt Kearns, thank you so very much for joining me today.
Truly our pleasure.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Great.